Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Laid Off Legends podcast, where resilience meets reinvention. We help professionals rewrite their narrative after a layoff, redesign their next chapter, and come out stronger. My name's Leo, a product builder and storyteller, learning and turning my Microsoft layoff into a different path. With each pod, I sit down with legends who are rebuilding their lives after layoffs and the experts that are helping them navigate these crossroads. Our guest today is Greg Ugwi, the founder and CEO of WeFranch, a company on a mission to make franchising accessible, transparent, and powerful for those who are ready to lead their own businesses and reclaim their own destinies. Greg's story is really relevant for anyone here who's been laid off and thinking what's next. He studied mathematics at Princeton, cut his teeth as a quant strategist at Goldman Sachs, building models that value franchises and securities, and then went on to found and scale an alternative data startup, raising millions and achieving a successful exit. Congrats, Greg. That's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
At WeFranch, Greg is helping people, especially those coming out of corporate jobs, transition into becoming franchisees or partnering with emerging brands. He believes strongly in the model of ownership as a path to economic empowerment. Today, we are digging into his journey, why franchising is such a compelling option right now, how WeFranch works, and what someone coming out of a layoff needs to know if they're considering this path. Greg, welcome to the Laid Off Legends podcast.
Thank you very much, Leo. It's great to be here.
So great to have you. I know we've been kind of trying to get this on the books for a while, so I'm glad that we're finally able to do it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're doing this, even though you have a cold. You're still
Thank you. Are you guys still on tour now, or are you still
So we just finished. We finished earlier this month.
Okay. How did the tour go?
It was fantastic. We went through 7 cities, one of them being Seattle, 7 cities with 10 events. For me, it was one of the losses was just how beautiful America is. And I do think part of that is just related to this topic is just how big the opportunity set is. Because often when you're stuck in one company, you start believing that that is the way, and it's almost a form of religion. Within the company, they have to sort of maintain that. Stepping around and seeing the country, traveling just does that for people, where it just gives you perspective. So for me, it's amazing how beautiful America is, different cultures and so much opportunity. But it's also true that I also learned how little people understand about franchising. So because we're meeting people face to face, there's kind of nowhere to hide. 100 people at each event. And some people, they might have a family member that owns a franchise. Otherwise, they just won't know that much about it. They would just be consumers.
That's amazing. And these are the opportunities to educate folks. If they're not owners of franchises, I could probably guarantee that they've been to one of these franchises to eat, to spend time. And so it's really interesting to see, hey, this could be you. This could be your store. So I can't wait to dive in. But before we do, could you take us a little bit back into your story? How did your background in data and startups actually lead you to WeFranch?
So I think I'm going to go all the way back to my childhood, because I think there is a seed there. There are some parts of the story I don't think I ever told anyone, but we'll share it here. So one is I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. Nigeria is a developing country, so there is no middle class. There are rich people and poor people. Like we have oil, so there's some really rich people. Anyway, I was among the poor people, and I was good at taking tests. So when I was 10 years old, I did really well on some tests. So I got to go to the richest school in Nigeria, a boarding school, Loyola Jesuit College. And all the kids there, like 90% of them were really wealthy. The other 10%, which I was part of, were people that got scholarships. And so now I'm going between these two worlds, where in school, I see my schoolmates, their parents own businesses with excellent brands. Maybe they do import, exports, bada bing, bada bang, they just make money. They vacation in London, it's just great. And it seems kind of easy and natural. And at the same time, I go home, and I guess this is the part I don't think I've ever told. So my mom just couldn't keep a job. For health reasons, she just couldn't keep a job. So she just kept getting laid off. So I can remember it like very traumatic, where sometimes we'll come home from school. And my elder sister, she's kind of very emotionally aware. So she will sort of sense something, and she'll just tell my mom, something's wrong. Did you get fired? And my mother will say yes. And it's like so painful. So it was just a very, very painful thing. And then she used to start small businesses, and they never used to work. So really colored our childhood. I was just always thinking, why is it that if only we could own our own business and nobody could fire my mother, kind of thing. But as I said, the businesses just will never work for like a decade. So I'm going back between these two worlds. My mother is really smart, and she works really hard. But as I said, she has health issues, so she just couldn't keep a job. And so I'm going between the schools. I see my schoolmates in school, their parents seem to have jobs. It's great. They own businesses. It's fantastic. And I'm always thinking, like, how is it that people create wealth? How do you go from the poor people? How do you flip to the rich people? Because I see them as two distinct sets. How do you own businesses that make money? I just did not understand how people could create wealth. And then I kept being good at taking tests. So when I was 16, I basically came to the US for college. So I went to Princeton, and it's more of the same. Like my roommate, he's still my closest friend, one of my closest friends today. His dad happened to own like the biggest hotel chain in Colombia, kind of like an iconic brand. And then eventually I went to work at Goldman. This is where I was like, these people really these are my people. So this was in 2009. Everybody hated us. They said like vampire squid and things, but Lloyd Vampire would say we are doing God's work. So we find people with businesses that work. When we say they work, we mean they satisfy three conditions. Basically, they have pricing power moats. That means customers are happy to pay. Second thing is they're able to recruit great people, the best people in the market, and pay them well. Finally, they make a return for their investors. So if they can handle those three people, we invest in them, they grow, and that's how you build New York from a prairie land to what you see today. He'll say, like, think of South Korea and North Korea. DNA-wise, they are the same people. You can't scientifically tell a North Korean from a South Korean. The land is basically the same size, roughly, the same geography. And people used to escape from South Korea to go to North Korea in the 60s. And today, South Korea is a first world country. They have great cities like any city you see. So that's the power of capitalism. So I really bought into that. And I founded a data company called Thinknum, where we provided data to some of the best hedge funds in the world, the best banks like Bank of America, Goldman, these will all be clients, and like large tech companies. And so that's what we're doing. And then eventually, as you said, we sold that company, and I'm thinking of what to do next. Providing data to PE firms, we've noticed that they tend to buy a lot of franchise businesses. So we learned about that industry. And I was always thinking, what if you provide the same tools we used to provide to the best hedge funds to prospective business owners? So when they're thinking of what local business can I bring, they're empowered, they have full agency. They can actually learn of a great iconic business and bring it to their neighborhood and create wealth. Going back to the story of like, what if my mom had that? That would have been amazing. So that's basically the motivation for starting French.
What a journey. I mean, the opportunity to have this really deep personal experience and then translating that into business solutions. Was there an aha moment for you, or was this continual as you began to see these things at home, in school, working with customers? Was there this flip that said, wow, empowerment is the way to go, ownership is the way to go?
Also, this question was always boiling in my mind. How do you create wealth? And I was point out a few aha moments. One is going to Goldman and saying like business ownership is what creates wealth. And then doing my own startup. So that really reinforced that you just, in modern age, it's capital. I understood the idea of that, for yourself, you want to try to own pieces of iconic businesses. Really, for my work at Goldman, was a strat at Goldman. So when you're a strat, my boss was Ken Castellino. He's a great guy. He came to me, and the strats are like 800 people. Most of them are like PhDs in physics or math, and we build tools for sales people. And then he came to me my first day, and he's like, look around. This is like a James Bond movie, right? I'm like, yeah, this is like a James Bond movie. This is amazing. And he's like, just remember one thing, you're not James Bond. Like the saleswomen and salesmen and the traders are the ones taking risks. They are like James Bond. They're putting their life on the risk. You're like Q or something, like you're providing tools to take the risk. So don't ever think you're the main character kind of thing. So that really stuck with me. But I really love that group of strats. Quite frankly, I would say like Goldman culture is not really my culture, but the strat group, I love that group. I love the idea of providing tools and data to help people like make decisions. Quite frankly, at Goldman, I used to scrape data. I was in the mortgage department, so we're trading like subprime bonds, BX securities. So I needed to know like how are Sandy states doing in real time, basically every month. And I can see this data on the website on Zillow and things, but we don't get that kind of real time data. And you couldn't pay Bloomberg $1 million to give it to you. They just don't do that. They collect their data in a specific kind of way, or I could just scrape it. So I started scraping that, and I got yelled at by my friend. He was my boss then. He's like, we're not allowed to do that. It could be inside information. You just can't do that. And that's how I got the idea. And I talked to my friends. A lot of them were in hedge funds. They also wanted data from the web. So that's kind of the genesis for Thinknum. And I started understanding, quite frankly, in Goldman's culture, data was very powerful. And I started understanding the power of if you have details of what is working in the business world, before other people understand it, especially in the private markets. You can create a lot of wealth.
That is really, really powerful. Where did the idea for WeFranch actually come about? From helping people think about starting their own franchise, or at least providing franchisees with the data that they need to start one?
Yep. So we sold Thinknum, and I was kind of in this malaise. I was thinking of what to do next, kind of thing. And then everybody was excited about AI. And quite frankly, I was not. And I still am not. And so there is someone, Jack Altman, he says, you either want to build in the heart of AI or you want to build as far from AI as possible. So I always kind of knew I knew I do want to build in AI, but it's true I didn't want to be adjacent to AI and be like competing with it. So I wanted to build as far away. And then at some point I ended up in the middle of New Jersey, in the middle of like nowhere with like my brother-in-law, Leif. So he was thinking of owning a franchise. So we went to a franchise expo, and you feel like you're cattle going through this gallery where essentially there's like all these demos, expos showing you basically buy this franchise, buy that franchise. And I was not in New Jersey. This was like in the middle of nowhere. So I was like, this cannot be like how it works. This is just ridiculous, because I knew of the PE side and how they analyze it. So that's where I started seeing this just huge gap between how professional investors analyze franchises and how like kind of like mom and pop people who are investing their whole life savings make investment decisions for which franchise to buy. So that is where I said, okay, I want to see if can we structure data here? Can we build a place where people make intelligent decisions about which franchise to buy?
And now that's the franchisee part. What about the ownership part? How does that kind of play into the WeFranch story?
But my worldview is that in order to build generational wealth, somehow you need to own a piece of an iconic business. So just think of iconic brands. Like nowadays, you can think of tech companies or you can think of luxury brands. If somehow you own a piece of that, so Warren Buffett obsesses about that. He thinks about iconic businesses and how he can own a piece of that. But if you don't have the money, it's actually extraordinarily hard because they are well valued, aka they're iconic. Well, franchising is one way where if I think of a McDonald or I think of a Wingstop or like a Chick-fil-A, in my neighborhood, by operating, can, own without a huge cost, without paying this premium for the brand. So I think franchising is a great, and there are 800,000 franchisees. It's the number one way people have become millionaires in the US, more than tech or more than finance. So like a lot of people are drawn to franchising for the idea of I can own a local business, but I don't have to create this brand. I own a local business that is attached to an iconic brand and a system that we know has track record of cash flowing. So that is how we guide people. Basically, if you're looking to go into franchising, you're not really going to benefit if they open more and more locations because you're limited to whatever territories you're buying. So you want to bring in the best performing, most iconic brands to your neighborhood. So start from the top, find the very best brands, try to get in there and work your way down. And don't worry about, do they have more room to grow? Are they going to open 1,000 more locations? It's true that you don't want to get into a dying brand. You have to have trust that for the next 10 years, 20 years, they'll continue to be iconic. But we believe you want to get into the most iconic brand. And it is the most effective way, in our view, when you don't have wealth, to own an iconic brand. It's basically like sweat equity.
Okay, we're getting into a lot of the tangibles now. What type of franchises are people discovering on the platform right now?
Yes, so there are things that people are drawn to, like basically like there are novelty brands people are drawn to, and there's a lot of tech. Like one of the best ones that we don't think is a novelty that is excellent is something like Sandbox VR, where they make like our rooms. They've raised over 100 million for Mixed Z and things of that nature. But really, what we urge people is don't think of it like, hey, I'm drawn to the specific concept, or I'm drawn to, I don't want to use the word gimmick, but you don't want to get infatuated with specific things. So instead, in our view in franchising, you need to think closer to a value investor. I'm less thinking of what is new in the world. I'm not thinking of what will change and how do I take advantage of that. If you're a VC or you're a startup, that's how you're thinking. I want to build a startup and think of what's changing. Here, you need to be thinking of what's not going to change. So I gave the example of Wingstop. So for 20 years, their average unit volume has gone up every year. That is through recessions. They do over 2 million revenue. They have 25% margins, things like that. So you want to find an iconic brand, something you have faith that, Warren Buffett would give the example of in 1962 was the most famous candy bar, Snickers. Today, what's the most famous candy bar? Snickers. So if you own Snickers all through there, you'll do really well, just as the US grows. So you need to think like that. Think of what is the most iconic brand. So things like chicken, coffee, So those are sectors that do it well. But there's also youth enrichment, there's spas, any service business. People are always going to spend money on making sure their kids have the best early education, things like Primrose. But they have been around for 40 years. They have over 500 locations. So we urge people to focus on iconic brands, not gimmicks.
Really interesting. How do people vet these opportunities to think about which ones they should get? You mentioned some of the really common ones, McDonald's, Wingstop, but then Sandbox VR. How do people think about vetting these to ensure that they're profitable and it's something that they really want to do?
So I'll say, look at data. So there are 4,500, slightly over 4,000 concepts in the US, and they have to publish data in things called franchise disclosure documents. And in that document, it can be like 400 pages. They'll be broken up to exactly 23 items. And in item 19, that's the only place where they can describe how much you make. So they'll say this is how much a Sandbox VR typically makes. So they make slightly over 2 million in revenue per location. And then they will say in item 7, this is how much it costs. And then they'll itemize the costs. So ultimately, you want to build a financial model that says, this is how much it's going to cost me. I can get SBA financing and things of that nature. And this is what my debt service would be. And then this is how much it tends to make. These are what my costs would be. So this is what I think my profit would be. So that's one aspect. The other thing will be making sure you trust the franchise. The way we think of it is when you're building a startup, typically, like the classic school of thought is there'll be two founders. One of the founders will be someone that is going to invent a product that is 10 times better than anything else in the market. So if we think of Apple, think of Steve Wozniak. He's kind of this product engineer, amazing genius. He invented, a computer that was 10 times better than anything else in the market. And then there's the entrepreneur. Think of Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs is the one that is going to rally the people, raise the money, basically take the product and win the market. Or you can think of Ben Horowitz and Marc Andreessen. Marc Andreessen invented the browser, 10 times better than anything else. And then Ben Horowitz built the org to win that market. So that's how you sort of think of that. In the franchise world, think of the franchisor as the product genius. So they're the one that is supposed to have invented something that is 10 times better than anything else in the market. So Sandbox VR is your co-founder in your local markets. And then you are the entrepreneur that is supposed to take that product and then build an org around it to win the market. So I guess it goes back to you have to make sure you can trust your co-founder. People say like having a co-founder, it's often, even with a franchisor, you can't really fire your franchisor. You can't divorce your franchisor. So it's quite frankly more serious than getting into marriage. You need to make sure you can trust them. So look into their background. And then one thing we do is we collect anonymous verified reviews from actual franchisees. So we have thousands of people leaving reviews that this is how it feels like to work with this franchisor. They treat me fairly. They're not like hidden fees. They don't nickel and dime me versus they do. They don't encroach on my territory versus they do. So there are many things where it's just trust. You're not going to have a legal document that can spec out a marriage and you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's just not going to work. So ultimately, you got to trust the other party. So yeah, we'll say use data, check out reviews from franchisees or actually speak to franchisees and make sure you can trust your partner. And then, yeah, that's basically the plan.
I want to switch gears here to things like mindset and the type of person that can succeed and why this is so important. First of all, layoffs continue across our industries. AI is reshaping the nature of work in a very interesting way. Why do you believe now is the right time for people to consider franchising?
So it goes back to what we said about essentially AI. You want to be in AI or as far from as possible. So we think in many ways, if you think of the disruption that's happening, a lot of it is going to be in things. The AI models, we talk about AI, LLMs, let's say that trend is basically trained from data from the internet. So it's going to really optimize for the written word or things of that nature. So being a local owner, knowing people in your community, having good judgments, having people trust you, knowing how to deal with employees, basically hopefully it's not taken wrong, but being spiritually awake. And I mean that very broadly, like being trustworthy and caring about your community, being a great owner. So we think that is very unlikely to be disrupted by AI. And quite frankly, if the other things get disrupted, then it will benefit because it's more rare. So that's not something you're going to trust on. So this is a very useful and in-demand skill set. And at the same time, it's the main way people have become wealthy in the US. So we think having high agency. So it's work and capital combined. When you're a franchisee, in many ways, you're the investor. There is access to SBA financing, but you provide a personal guarantee for that. Think of it like you are the one that is you own the space. So you are the investor in 90% of the cases, and you're also the employee, quote unquote, the operator. So that when you combine that, it's powerful because you have agency. That means that you hire, you fire, you make decisions, you can change things. You're not like when you're just an employee and someone else controls the capital, then you don't have as much agency by definition. But when you have those two combined, then the main thing is agentic capital. And I do think like people talk of agentic AI. So we are very excited about agency. And we say like in many ways people talk about it precisely because AI doesn't have agency. In short, but we don't really want to hate on AI. It's great. It does what it does. But we do think people are going to always, at least for the foreseeable, for the next decade, need these local owners and they value them. So we think now is a great time. And yeah, we are seeing a wave of people that are anxious about AI and disruption moving in. So the quicker you make that move, the better. So that's how we think of it.
It's interesting you talked about embracing agency, which is a really difficult thing to do in corporate because you are in a structure. You have silos, you have roles, and you have partners. There's a mindset shift that's needed. We talk about this ownership mindset versus employee mindset. You mentioned agency. What other mindset shifts are really critical when it comes to considering franchising?
So I think it sort of goes with agency, but it's taking intelligent risk. So quite frankly, my sisters will say I was not good at soccer, but I really love soccer. I really love sports. And I think that's one place where you learn to take risk. And if they pass you the ball and you don't do anything with it, you will by definition fail. So you know that, just think of it like in basketball. So I'm talking of soccer, but in basketball, you have 21 seconds. You have to take some risk. Otherwise, you can't just hold on to the ball. Anyway, so learning how to take intelligent risk. So as an employee, managing risk is not really a skill set, but I do think more and more in society, even in the white collar work, if you want to, basically building the skill set of an owner where you're constantly, there is someone, great franchisor we work with, and I was talking to someone on the corporate department, and he was saying why he didn't want to be an operator. And he says it's like constantly 24/7 living with risk and liability. So I do think that is some, I'll say, downside. I don't think it's as much of a downside, and I'll tell you why. But I do think basically learning how to manage risk and live with it and not be overwhelmed by it. I think that's important. Now, one of the reasons why I don't think it's that bad, for example, when I left Goldman is, when I take that leap, it's like, oh my God, like they put you on this track. It's almost like they're playing games with you. You're used to going through school and graduating, and then you become an analyst, you're an associate, they're giving you this path to become a partner. And if you stay on that track, you're a good boy. And if you step out of that, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, it's not like I failed out of college. Is that what's going on? So really, it's not true. Like, it's fundamentally non-linear. It's an illusion that you're making progress. So if you leave, well, you can go back. So maybe I can go back and be an analyst or an intern. Who cares? Odds are you'll be able to find some other job. Maybe it won't pay just as much or something. Odds are to pay more. But for you to get a chance to take a risk or own something, if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. So it's an illusion that, if I take this risk, like if I make this bad pass, the whole thing will crumble. So learning that it's true that you don't want to make foolish risks. And we do think, franchising, unlike startups, like there are ways where you can go into brands where they have a track record. If they've opened 1,000 locations and all 1,000 of them have been successful for the last 20 years, when you open the 1,001st one, it is somewhat risky, but it's not that risky. You can still get fired if you're in a job. So that's kind of how we think of it.
I really enjoy that analogy because one of the hardest things is building a brand. It's earning customers, gaining trust. And when a brand has kind of done that for you, it's easier to say, okay, great, I have the passion for this particular thing. I love my community. I want to serve my community this way. I'm going to go do it. So it feels like to a certain extent, the wind is in your favor when it comes to some of these things. The flip side is also true there. Do you have a sense of what some of the misconceptions that people have around franchising?
I think a lot of this is like they think of it when you work, especially a job that you don't like, to be honest. There is someone that said the most addictive thing on earth. What do you think is the most addictive drug? He says it's that 2-week paycheck. It just comes in. So you're addicted to that. So, and then people start having this fantasy of, I don't like my job. So just thinking of like with my cave brain, I don't like my job, but I really like the paycheck. What if I could find a way where I don't have to work and the paycheck just comes in, passive income? And then so many people sell you that dream of like somehow, some way you just have this passive income. Well, if you don't have a lot of money, it's basically borderline impossible to have passive income that will replace your job. So the one thing we talk about is franchise is a lot of work. Now you get to own it, you get to build equity, you get to have agency, but it's a lot of work. Quite frankly, it's like a full-time job. Like there might be some types of franchises where you don't actually have to work full-time, but then you expect much less returns. So I think there is this misconception people often have. It's like, what if I can own many iconic brands and I don't have to work? Well, why would someone build an iconic brand that they know is guaranteed to work and then give it to you in your exclusive rights in their territory if you are not going to push it? So I think that's the one misconception. The other one, somewhat related, is people think, okay, if I have the money, I can just go to any brand and just buy it. I'm buying a franchise, kind of like I'm buying shoes. You have infinite agency. Well, when you're getting into that relationship, we talked about how you need to trust the franchisor. Guess what? They need to trust you too. It's like you have a 10-year, they don't, if they ever have to cancel a franchise, they have to put in a record. It makes it very hard for them to recruit. It's legal trouble. So they never want to do that either. You have that agency. So before they can let you in with your own agency, like 2 out of 3 of the people that have the capital on our platform that want to be a franchisee, that had this excellent corporate, career, they get rejected. So the franchisor is almost always, for any territory, have multiple eligible candidates and they will be picking. And then you also picking. Maybe the third one I'll say is people obsess about the amount of capital it requires. One, in the US, when you're opening a startup, you can't take SBA loans, right? Well, for franchises, you can. So that means you can fund 80 to 90% of it with government-backed debt that is basically non-economic, so like cheap money. So that is the secret of franchising in America. 89%, and then the other 10%, for example, we have many partners that will fund the rest of the equity. That, although you provide a personal guarantee for the SBA debt, we don't think it's not like I need to have $1 million in the bank. Yeah, so those are the 3 main misconceptions.
Greg, you've actually come up on something that's really, really important, the money aspect. Because a lot of folks are like, okay, wow, how do I start this thing? I have the passion, I have the skill, I love my community, but the money. How does the money work when it comes to franchising? And how do people actually get started?
So I'll sort of start more specifically, then I'll zoom out to how I think one can think about it. So one is, in practice, you can get SBA loans. So if you think of it, takes $1 million, you can get 80% of that through a bank, and the government guarantees it. And those SBA loans are specifically for people who won't qualify for conventional loans. So if you had enough money in the bank to qualify for conventional loans, you can't get SBA loans. So it's kind of a way the government gives you to get things started. Now, you provide a personal guarantee for that. If you ever default on that, they can come after you for it. And second of all, you can never get another SBA loan after that. So you want to be careful. One thing to keep in mind is 80% of it usually will come from SBA loans. So then there's the other 20%. So for the other 20%, there are people on our platform that will invest, similar to search funds, like to invest, that 20%. So you might not need to put any money down, except providing a personal guarantee for the SBA loan. So we encourage you to check us out for that. Then, so that's kind of like the technical of it. So 80% of it comes from SBA loans. The rest you can finance from family, friends, or savvy investors. Then I'll step back out and go back to kind of like Goldman. So if you're, remember we said that franchisors are selective, iconic brands. So if you're a competitive candidate and you can get into great brands will want you to be their owner. And these great brands, they have like 25% margins, growing AUV. Capital is smart. Of course, they want to seek you. That's why the government allows SBA loans for franchises. And they have to be pre-approved, like good franchises. I won't rely on their underwriting, but basically that's the thinking. But there are many savvy investors that will invest alongside you. Basically, you have a concept that is de-risked. So it has product market fit, which is the hardest thing to find. And it makes money. It's profitable on the unit level. There are many ways to find the money. As I said, we'll be happy to work with you on that. But that is basically the logic. You're going to do a project that a rational person can see will make money. You will find some way to finance it.
You mentioned something, you said a competitive candidate. What are some of the characteristics franchisors look for in franchisees when it comes to, hey, this guy is going to make this successful, or this gal is going to do incredible here? What are some of the things they look for so that people could think about those?
I'm going back to financing, which is related to competitive candidates. Like you can think of, there are brands like Chick-fil-A where all you need is $10,000 as an investment. You should check out Chick-fil-A's website to learn more about that specifics, but that's all you will need. So you just need to, and I'll also borrow from them. So they're a brand I've sort of learned from. I think, people look for IQ. So the truth of the matter is, like, you got to be smart. I think people don't like to say that, but you got to be reasonably intelligent. but it's not as important as probably emotional intelligence and having grit and, having a will to serve in your community. So some connection to that community. I think those are the main things people will look for. Like smart person, emotional IQ, aka I can deal with customers. I can deal with employees. Oftentimes the employees you deal with, they're going to be young, teenage, hourly workers. They kind of don't care. And you'll probably be in a different age bracket. And then if you have some roots in the community where you really want to serve, and then you have grit, it's going to be hard and you're determined to make it successful. So if you have those things and you're able to package and willing to package yourself, like, yeah, I'll say beautiful thing I like about it goes back to where I started with my mom. It feels to me is this kind of thing that anybody, quote unquote, can do it. Like there are some things where I feel like, oh, how do I become wealthy? It's like, oh, I need to invent like Facebook. It's like it happened at a point in time. Like they're so smart, they have access to so much money. Or I need to be a Wall Street like rent tech. This really feels to me is as accessible as you get as a path to building wealth.
One of the things I'm really enjoying about the laid-off community is that you have this moment, this very painful moment. You're so identified with the company, with the team, and then you get laid off. And then suddenly, as you find your way and you rebuild your identity, there's a resilience that emerges. And then there's an openness that says, okay, what's next? And then franchising becomes one of them. Changing careers becomes one of them. But it becomes such a more appealing path when you can reclaim your agency and all the other things that I may not have done, like building a brand, they've been done for you. And there's all the operations manuals and things like that. So it's something that's incredibly appealing when it comes to folks who are considering the next option with brands that they've probably visited themselves.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree.
Greg, this is awesome, man. I really enjoyed our conversation. So where can people find you, learn more about WeFranch if they're interested in franchising? How do they get connected? Walk us through that.
Yep. So it's WeFranch.com, and feel free to email me, Gregory, GREGORY .UGWI @WeFranch.com. And then we'll be happy to set up a free consultation. We'll be able to walk you through the platform. So yeah.
Thank you, Greg. It's been such a pleasure. You have an outstanding team. I've watched what you guys are doing around the country, and it's just so impressive in how you're inspiring people to, first of all, reclaim their agency, career sovereignty, and then ultimately build wealth, which is a journey that we're all on. So thank you. And thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Leo.
Folks, this has been another interesting episode. Thank you so much for listening. If today's story inspired you, please subscribe and share it with someone else who you believe needs to hear it. If you have any questions, please drop them below. I'll answer those personally. And if they're for Greg, I'll pull him in as well. For more insights, please join our YouTube channel, LinkedIn, company page, and our community of legends that are rewriting what's possible after a layoff. Remember, every ending holds the blueprint to a new beginning. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you next time.